quarterback. Thought Shea Patterson was that, and he's had some issues. He had some issues, obviously, trying to overcome Ohio State, trying to do certain things in that offense the past couple seasons. Can Michigan finally overcome that hump? I think Minnesota definitely has some holes on defense where you could exploit. However, Minnesota's offense will be exciting to watch this year. It actually gets me kind of amped for that game. When you talk about Tanner Morgan getting Rashad Bateman back, they return all 5 starters on the offensive line. So that's the game I'll be looking forward to seeing the most this weekend, probably.
Yeah, that's going to be an interesting one. And, new offensive coordinator at Minnesota because Kirk Soroka has headed on over to Penn State. Don Brown still the defensive coordinator at Michigan. And honestly, Andy, I wouldn't have given you very good odds on Don Brown remaining at Michigan after the way Ohio State lit up Michigan for the second straight year at the end of the year. I just thought maybe the Harbaugh-Don Brown tenure had reached its end. A lot of Michigan fans were upset with Don Brown, who so far has shown an ability to put together a great defense until the game that he absolutely positively has to win, that season-ending finale against Ohio State. It's not all Don Brown's fault, but when your defense gives up the kind of points that they have given up the last 2 years against OSU, you got to do some really difficult inventory of what you're doing and why you're doing it. And if Minnesota comes out with, as you mentioned, an entire returning starting offensive line, Rashad Bateman, who was opting out and then opted back in, Tanner Morgan, who next to Justin Fields, clearly the second best quarterback in the Big Ten last season, and plenty of time to prepare for all the wrinkles that Michigan has shown before under Don Brown. It would not surprise me if Minnesota put up a lot of points against Michigan. I'm not guaranteeing that that's going to be a win for Minnesota because I think Michigan has some weapons on the offensive side and we don't know much about the Gophers. But I would assume that one's going to be a pretty high-scoring affair. It will surprise me if Michigan's defense, young and unproven, holds up well against Minnesota.
Yeah, absolutely. Another interesting one to watch this weekend certainly will be Penn State, Indiana. I'll talk about Indiana a little more later. They're kind of my sleeper pick for the Big Ten. But that game will be interesting to see exactly how much losing Micah Parsons affects the Penn State defense because that Indiana offense is legit. They've got a really good offensive unit this year. Indiana returns a lot on defense, but they're kind of, they've never been known for their defense in the Big Ten exactly. So seeing how they'll stack up against the Penn State offense, and is this kind of the next step for Indiana this season? A lot of interesting storylines entering that game that I think will be interesting to see. What do you think about that game, Bruce?
I agree with you. I think that's a real danger game for Penn State. You have a new offense with Kirk Soroka coming over from Minnesota. You've got some unsettled spots, unproven spots on the offensive line. Wide receivers at Penn State I think they have 9 of them, but they still don't know beyond maybe the top one who's going to step in and be somebody they can count on at that position. And Indiana, coming on the schedule the week before Penn State plays at home against Ohio State, it just seems like a very possible trap game for Penn State. They have struggled over in Bloomington before. Tom Allen, as you mentioned, has done a nice job at Indiana, shoring up the defensive side of the football. Michael Penix, he can be explosive at the quarterback position. So that one to me is one that Penn State can't be looking ahead to Ohio State coming into University Park next week, because if so, they might welcome the Buckeyes with an 0-1 record.
No, absolutely. You gotta hone in on that game. Now, Bruce, I'm kind of curious as we're kind of previewing the season here. You've got obviously 8 games to figure out the Big Ten standing. Not usually we get our 9, right? But who do you see as the winner from each of these divisions going in? Who do you think from the East, and who do you think is going to come out from the West?
Well, I don't think there'll be any surprises in the East. I'm going to pick Ohio State. I watched Clemson on Saturday, and I'll stick by my guns that I would take Ohio State-Clemson in the national title game right now over the field, even though Alabama looked pretty good against Georgia. I just expect to see out of Ohio State on Saturday the same kind of high-level efficiency and elite performance offensively that we saw out of Clemson against Georgia Tech, putting up 52 in the first half, and they could have scored 100 if they wanted to. They ended up with 73. So I think Ohio State clearly is the class of the East. And then out of the West, I despite the injury to Jack Cohn, having watched just a few highlights of Graham Merz, and granted they don't put incompletions on highlight reels that they release from Badger practices, but Graham Merz, to me, this might be a good thing for Wisconsin that Graham Merz was thrust into the starting block by Jack Cohn's injury, because he throws a really nice deep ball. They have three, I think, senior wide receivers led by Danny Davis. Wisconsin has to figure out a way to become more of a dink and dunk passing team. They can't just throw it to their tight ends and throw it to Garrett Groshek out of the backfield. They've got to find a way to get the ball downfield and stretch the field, and that'll make things so much easier for Nakia Watson in the offensive run attack. So I'm going to take Wisconsin out of the West. I know it's not earth-shattering, surprising picks, but I'm going chalk. The two teams that have dominated those divisions, I think, will dominate them again. How about you?
Well, for obvious reasons, Ohio State out of the East, I think they're one of the most complete teams in college football this year, if not the most complete, alongside Clemson. Like we talked about this before, both of us are taking Ohio State and Clemson against the field to reach the national title this season. From the West, I think there's some interesting questions on Wisconsin's offense there and defense. You lose Chris Orr and Zach Bond at linebacker. Who's going to step up and replace those guys? Is Wisconsin going to be able to get the same pass rush they did last year? Such a huge part of their success. I do like Graham Mertz at quarterback. I think he's really talented, but he's going to need some time to adjust. Does Wisconsin maybe slip up in that time and get upset like they did last year? I think Quintez Cephas is a huge loss, and one that not a lot of people have talked about because he was one of the more underrated players in the Big Ten last season. But what he did for their passing offense is a weapon that Wisconsin doesn't often have at the receiver position. So who's going to step up and fill those shoes and be, like you said, give Wisconsin the ability to spread the football around the field and open up the running game? Because here's the thing, if Wisconsin wants to win a Big Ten title, they found out time and time again the past few years, if you try to run straight out of Ohio State, that's what they defend best. You have to be two-dimensional on offense. You can't just run the ball. So I think there is an opportunity for Minnesota to take the next step in the West Division when you consider all they return on the offensive side. The question marks on defense really worry me for them, especially on the interior, because, of course, Wisconsin's going to run downhill on you, and the Wisconsin-Minnesota game could end up as a de facto Big Ten West title game again this year. But to me, I will give the Badgers the slight edge as you did. I'm also taking chalk. Nothing too exciting today on the Big Ten. A few good men on the Big Ten podcast. But I think it's very close between Wisconsin and Minnesota, and I will be excited to watch both teams' seasons unfold.
Yeah, I think Iowa and Northwestern enjoy the role that they have, which is they're all they're kind of in that once every 5-year type rotation. Is you got to watch them. Maybe Iowa a little bit more than that, but you always have to keep your eye on them. I just don't think either team this year is in the position where they can keep up with either Wisconsin or Minnesota, and this will be a big year for P.J. Fleck in Minnesota. You know, he wins 11 games last season, but he did not win the West, and I could see, given some of the success that he's had in recruiting, Andy, if he can build on that 11-win season this year, then he's going to set himself up for continued future success there in Minnesota. I think most of us thought when he went there, he would do what he did at Western Michigan. He'd get him respectable, and then he'd parlay that respectability into another job somewhere else. I really don't think Minnesota is a bad job if he can build on the success this year. Then you get the belief that you have ingrained in people, and maybe you start to get some of those big offensive line recruits away from Iowa and away from Wisconsin, kids who want to play up there in that area. But this could also be a year where I could see Minnesota struggling big time on defense and finishing up around 500. And in that situation, then I think what we saw out of the Gophers last year is kind of a one-year aberration as opposed to them becoming a force in the Big Ten West.
Well, what I will say is that I think this is the first year P.J. Fleck has kind of a target on him. And he did, like at Western Michigan, he was in and out so quick. People knew who he was for a season, and then he was at Minnesota. And then last year with the Gophers, no one expected him to do as well as they did. He exceeded every expectation I had for that Minnesota football team last year. built a great thing there. But this is, again, like I just said, the first season, people will actually be looking at one of his teams as a contender. Minnesota has a target. People know it's them in Wisconsin in the West this year. So how does that pressure change anything for him? I think this will be a season we find out a lot about him as a coach. I'll be interested to see if he's in at Minnesota for the long haul. And like you said, it's all about the recruiting bases, right? Mm-hmm. Can you start convincing guys, 4- and 5-star guys, maybe not 5-star guys, but at least 4-star guys, to attend cold weather Minnesota, convince them this is the best place for their future? Because really, without recruiting, you can't take that next step in the college football world today.
Yeah, and he has to get those stars out of Cretin-Durham High School up there. He has to get the guys out of the Twin Cities area, the Chris Winkies, the James Laurinaitis, the guys who have gotten away, the Steve Walshes, the guys who have gotten away in the past to go play somewhere else. If PJ Fleck can get those guys, then he can build. Of course, recruiting is not a problem for Ohio State. The Buckeyes are crushing it in recruiting. They'll have a host of freshman wide receivers this year whose names you don't know now, but you probably will know. Penn State would love to have Julian Fleming, I'm sure, but he got away. He's at Ohio State. We'll talk more about the Buckeyes momentarily. First, a quick reminder for those of you who are watching us on the Chris Landry Football Channel on Twitch, hit that follow button in the top right-hand corner of the Twitch screen. You'll be notified every time we go live. That's all we're asking today. Hit the follow button. Enjoy the in-studio fun of Twitch TV with us right here on the Chris Landry Football Show. And our friends in the Big 12, in defense of the Big 12, come up at the top of the hour. Andy and I are with you at 10 o'clock every Monday morning in the East. All right, most intriguing player to you in the Big Ten, Andy? There are a lot of players we already know about, but there are players who are asked to be stepping in, filling big shoes. If they have a transformative year, they can really sway things. You've mentioned Tanner Morgan was that kind of a player for Minnesota last season. If you had to cite an intriguing player, maybe not a first-team All-American type, maybe not a national award type at this juncture, but somebody that if he has a year, he could really lift his team, really elevate his team, and make it a special year. Do you have an intriguing player in mind?
Well, yeah, absolutely. For me, I mentioned him earlier, it's Joe Milton. The quarterback situation at Michigan has been a storyline since Harbaugh entered the program. Mm-hmm. And again, like I said, Shea Patterson, you thought was the answer the past couple seasons, and mixed returns. He had some good games for sure. But Joe Milton to beat out Dylan McCaffrey, every indication is that Dylan McCaffrey transferred because Milton was winning that competition. Mm-hmm. To beat out Dylan McCaffrey, win the starting role as a fairly young player, someone we haven't seen a whole lot from. Even in garbage time in games. He entered for a couple snaps against Ohio State last year in that loss, threw an interception, if I remember correctly. But I'm excited to see such a big body, strong arm, fairly mobile, I think, too. Not to the extent Dylan McCaffrey was, but can definitely have some of that escapability that you need if you're facing a strong pass rush. And can the offensive line protect him, too? Keep him clean. He's a huge wild card at quarterback for me. I don't know what he's going to be for Michigan this year.
Yeah, I am with you there. Joe Milton is extremely intriguing to me, and I am intrigued almost as much by him as a runner and how much they run him as I am by his throwing. We all saw his arm last year. It is unquestionably a great arm, but it takes more than just a strong arm to become a great quarterback. And that's why my intriguing player is going to be somebody who can support Joe Milton. They have not had the kind of tailback, the kind of rushing attack that I have anticipated they would have under Jim Harbaugh for as long as he has been there. So they seem to be very excited about Giles Jackson, the kid who scored Michigan's first touchdown last year in their game against Ohio State up in Ann Arbor. So I'm going to take Giles Jackson. Now, he's not, as far as I know, the far and away tailback. He may be outflanked outside sometimes. I wonder if they're going to use him like they used Jabril Peppers on offense and move him around a lot. But they need a playmaker on offense. You can have a quarterback, and that's fine, but you do have to have somebody you can get the ball in their hands and have them do something special with it. I don't think Chris Evans is that guy. I don't think Zach Charbonnet is that guy. It's tough for a tight end to be that guy. You need a speed guy who can get it in his hands, and he can absolutely make it happen. And so for me, the most intriguing player, and we saw this with Rondale Moore a couple years ago at Purdue, Andy, that kind of a player, that electric kind of a player who you can move around and cause the defense to focus on him, or at times maybe even forget about him because of the way you formation him, I think Giles Jackson is the guy that I'm going to watch. And it would be easy to pick somebody from Ohio State, but look, I mean, we know what Justin Fields is. The only unknown with the Buckeyes really is it going to be a one or a two-headed monster at running back with Master Teague and Trey Sermon as they try to fill in for J.K. Dobbins, who had a 2,000-yard season last year. That one goes by the boards in a lot of people's eyes because they focused on the defensive improvement or they focused on what Justin Fields did for them. But the Buckeyes do have to replace a 2,000-yard rusher, the single-season record holder in Ohio State history.
Oh, yeah. The playmaking at Michigan, it has been another interesting storyline because they've had great receivers that have come through there the past few years. I was shocked at how underutilized Donovan Peoples-Jones and Nico Collins were throughout the season for Michigan, but especially against Ohio State. I think you have to challenge Ohio State down the field more than you have the past few years at Michigan. And especially if you look back at the game in 2018, Nico Collins had some huge catches against Kendall Sheffield, Ohio State's corner. Really was some of the best success Michigan had offensively in that game. Everyone was surprised at how well a really subpar Ohio State defensive group, if not bad Ohio State defensive group by program standards, was able to contain Michigan in that game. And I really thought it was because they didn't challenge the corners. Harbaugh has to show the ability, especially with a big-armed quarterback, to spread the ball down the field and use guys that you have on the edges that you've recruited to get.
Let's talk a little bit about that Nebraska matchup against Ohio State. Cornhuskers have a new offensive coordinator. His name is Matt Lubick. And if people say, wait a minute, that name sounds familiar, well, sure it does. Sonny Lubick used to be the head coach at Colorado State. Matt Lubick is his son. Matt Lubick was with Scott Frost at Oregon. Scott Frost would dearly love to come up with the kind of high-powered offense that he had when he was out there with the Ducks, Andy. But I just don't know. Scott Frost entering year 3 at Nebraska, that was such a great feel-good story. Nebraska getting a guy that, had been a legend at Nebraska, and they all thought he would duplicate the success that he had at Central Florida. I'm not saying it won't happen, but you and I just spent a considerable amount of time on this podcast talking about a possible successor to Wisconsin in the Big Ten West, and it was Minnesota. It wasn't Nebraska. And I guarantee you, when the Nebraska folks hired Scott Frost, they thought when we were sitting here on the cusp of the 2020 season, we'd be talking about the Nebraska Cornhuskers as a legit lead pipe threat in that Big Ten West.
Yeah, it certainly hasn't gone down that way thus far. It's taken time for Frost to try and rebuild the program. This will be a really important year for him. I think didn't get any help from the scheduling at the Big Ten headquarters.
That's their reward for fighting the conference right there.
Absolutely. But like I said, this is an important year. I think you really have to show some sort of momentum. You have to get some sort of momentum going in this program because this season isn't the year to win the Big Ten West. That's fine. But you really have to start rolling in and contending in year 4. Year 4 is always just you should be a contender by year 4 of any coach's tenure because now you have your guys in the program. It's the 4th year of your recruits. Your recruits are seniors or redshirt juniors. You might have a few 5th-year guys from the previous tenure, but year 4 is just really important for a head coach. We talked about Tom Herman last week, and he's in year 4. And look at all the lashback he's gotten for where Texas is because it's his guys now. That's the case for Scott Frost next year. So I don't think it's make or break that you contend in the Big Ten West this year, but it is next year, and it will be important for Nebraska to build that momentum going into next season.
We want to thank those of you who found us on Twitch TV. That's twitch.tv/The Chris Landry Football Show. 2 things today. Hit that follow button. It's the little heart in the bottom right-hand side of the screen. That'll send you a notification every time we go live and a link to the show. And secondly, chat with us on Twitch. Say you guys are crazy. You guys forgot about so-and-so. And we'll give you a shout-out back as we'll be able to see your comments right here on the screen. I thought Scott Frost was on track when he brought his first Nebraska team into Ohio Stadium. They played great that day. 35, or maybe it was a 6-point margin. Nebraska missed some opportunities in that game. They will come back on Saturday without J.D. Spielman, who's always had a really good game against Ohio State. J.D. Spielman, the adopted son of Rick Spielman, Minnesota Vikings general manager, is transferred to TCU. And Frost, to me, looks like he has a lot of work to do rebuilding that defense, and he's not going to get any leeway from Ohio State because the Buckeyes thrilled to be out there on the turf in Ohio Stadium, having believed ever since their loss to Clemson last year in the playoff game, Andy, that they were worthy of playing for the title last season and expecting to play for the title this year. So that's going to be a very single-minded team that Scott Frost and the Nebraska Cornhuskers run into on Saturday at noon.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I think it's about time to look at this Ohio State team. So why are we thinking, for those who listen to us and aren't in with the Ohio State crowd as much, maybe you listen as a fan of the Big Ten, why is Ohio State looked at, despite having not even played a game this season, as the main challenger to Clemson? Because obviously that challengers are coming from the ACC. We've seen it. Notre Dame 12-7 against Louisville this weekend. I don't think there's a team that could stand up to Clemson in the ACC. I thought that might be Miami, obviously not. And Miami was a real team. So,
yeah. And we thought it might be North Carolina. Now North Carolina's gone into Tallahassee and gotten beat by Florida State.
Right. I think I might have said something about pumping the brakes on them.
I believe you did last week, pumping the brakes on North Carolina. That was your "you can't handle the truth."
Yeah. So anyway, I was right there. But Ohio State this season, they return. I think they'll have the best offensive line in the country. You return an All-American at guard in Wyatt Davis, a Remington candidate, maybe even the favorite to win the Remington at center, Josh Myers. You'll have a former 5-star at the opposite guard, Harry Miller. His first year as a starter, but rave reviews. Left tackle Thayer Munford, a returning All-Big Ten performer. Right tackle will be Nicholas Petit-Frere, most likely in his third year with the program, another former 5-star recruit who spent a lot of time learning and growing behind Brandon Bowen at that position, and who I think will eventually succeed Brandon Bowen as a better player at the right tackle spot. Obviously, the Heisman candidate at quarterback, everybody knows, Justin Fields. The question mark at running back, I think, will be answered well. Trey Sermon is what this offense is looking for. If Teague shows a better lateral mobility as a runner, he could really factor in as a power option. Tight end, Luke Farrell and Jeremy Ruckert, and even Jake Hausman. Receivers, you've got a really deep, young receiving core. Chris Olave might be one of the best in the country this year, same for Garrett Wilson. Defense is the only place there are question marks for this team. They're going to have one of, if not the best offense in college football this year. And really, the only big question mark on defense is in the secondary. When you talk about Shaun Wade is back at one corner, but the other 3 starters are going to be new. Marcus Williamson's kind of an underrated guy, and I'll be really excited to see how he performs at that slot corner position. Is he the answer there? Safety, this is an interesting storyline too. So Ohio State's only going one high again this year. That was confirmed last week. And I want to know your thoughts on this, Bruce. So we have all season long, we thought Josh Proctor, or all this past year, we thought Josh Proctor was the clear heir apparent to Jordan Fuller at the free safety spot. Now, all the message we're getting is that it will be split time, or that the competition is still unfolding between him and Marcus Hooker, younger brother of Malik Hooker, former All-American safety for Ohio State and first-round draft pick now with the Colts. So, is it an indictment against Proctor that he wasn't what he thought the staff thought he was going to be? Is it that Marcus Hooker was a lot better than we thought, that the staff thought he was going to be? Or maybe is it a combination of the two? Or do we have reason to be confident in both those guys, or do we have reason to be worried about these two guys?
Well, I think when you go back and you watch the tape of the Fiesta Bowl, there were a few instances where Josh Proctor was out there and had opportunities to make tackles and did not. And we saw what the consequences of that is. Trevor Lawrence goes the distance, and Travis Etienne goes the distance. So I think Ohio State's coaches are open to finding somebody who's maybe a little bit more of a sure tackler, and that is something that when you play in one high at the safety position, missed tackles aren't good. And so I tend to believe that because of the amount of talent on the Ohio State roster, if a guy steps up and is the proverbial bracketed player on the depth chart, then he's earned it. A year ago, we expected Brendan White to have a great year coming off Rose Bowl MVP defensive performance. He didn't hardly get on the field because Pete Werner became the kind of a player that we didn't know he could become. And I think that might be what we see at a couple of positions for the Ohio State defense this year. It could be Hooker at the safety position. It could be maybe Shaun Wade is an even better wide side corner than we thought. I mean, we know he can play slot corner. We see if he can play the wide side of the field. Maybe it's Zach Harrison, who I don't see conceivably how Ohio State's pass rush could possibly be as good as it was a year ago without Chase Young, Robert Landers, Devon Hamilton, but maybe it will be. I just know when you stack up talent the way Ohio State stacks up talent, that gives you two things. It gives you, number one, of course, great ability, but number two, great competition. And great competition is what leads to breakout players that you've never heard from before. So I don't think Ohio State is going to be weak at any position out there. And if an underclassman is challenging an upperclassman like a Josh Proctor, then that's only going to make Proctor better, which clearly from the Fiesta Bowl needs to happen, at least in some isolated cases. And it's also going to encourage those other younger players under him. We're going to see this at the wide receiver position. I mean, the wide receivers that they brought in are just ridiculous. And I don't know how that's going to shake out. It reminds me of the old classic, like a bunch of hungry dogs in a room and you throw one steak in there and let the toughest one be the one who comes out with it. But, man, at the wide receiver position, beyond Garrett Wilson, beyond Chris Olave, beyond Jamison Williams, there's room for another young man to step in there and play. And I really cannot wait to see who that is that forms a bond with Justin Fields and gives Ohio State yet another big play threat.
Right. They actually surveyed a bunch of Ohio State writers. Who was that? It was Buckeye Sports Bulletin surveyed 35 Ohio State beat writers a number of questions about the Ohio State football team. The majority, I think it was above 50%, said they believe the breakout freshman for this year will be Jackson Smith-Jigba, who is one of those four big-time receiver recruits, guy who caught over 2,000 yards worth of passes at Texas high school last season. I forget which high school it was, but he would over 2,000 yards receiving. I remember when I was looking up his stats, I was writing for the Lantern at the time, and I saw the number of yards, the number of touchdowns he had, and I thought it was a career number. Turns out it's just a season number. So he's something special for the future, and he's not even the highest rated guy they got. No, Julian Fleming was the number one receiver in the class. So you have a number of breakout candidates at that position. I wouldn't be surprised to see multiple of them break out. And G. Scott has looked incredible in camp. Every time I see him on video from, they post camp highlights, he's making one-handed catches, huge catch radius, really fast player too. So any one of those freshmen, and maybe multiple, could be huge this season at receiver for Ohio State.
Yeah, and I've seen great things said also about Mookie Cooper. He's in that group as well. All right, a reminder that the A Few Good Men on the Big Ten podcast official coffee is Hemisphere Coffee Roasters. You get 15% off when you use the promo code Big Ten in all caps. Hemisphere Coffee Roasters. Why is it the best coffee? Well, they buy it from growers around the world. They buy it direct. The growers get more money because they don't have to go through government middlemen. They're allowed then to do great things and conduct commerce in their local communities, but you get the best coffee you've ever tasted. Trust me on that. Everybody that orders from Hemisphere Coffee Roasters orders again because it is so good. HemisphereCoffeeRoasters.com, promo code Big Ten in all caps, and you will get 15% off. All right, Andy, it's come to that point of the podcast where we issue a cold, hard truth. Last week you hit it out of the park with North Carolina, so let's see what we have in store this week.
Well, I kind of want to talk about my dark horse in the Big Ten for this segment. I think Indiana will surprise people this year. Am I picking them over Penn State? Not necessarily, but I think that'll be a great game. Getting Peyton Hendershot back after it was uncertain that he was going to be on the team following some legal trouble in the offseason is big for them. When you look at all they have back on offense, between Penix at quarterback, between Stevie Scott at running back, and the offensive line has a couple of question marks, but returns a lot of people as well. Defense returns 9 starters. And like I said, not known for their defense, Indiana has been in the past few years. As their offense has developed, that's kind of been the one side that they need. It's the piece that they need to take the next step. But when you return 9 guys, you run a fairly unique scheme in the 4-2-5 that teams could – it can confuse teams sometimes to see that alignment on defense, kind of mix in some odd fronts and looks with that. They're my dark horse team in the Big Ten this year. So that's kind of part one of my you can't handle the truth. My other, I actually have a second truth today.
All right, what is it?
I think people put way too much stock into the early AP poll and coaches poll rankings in college football. I heard someone make an argument in a previous season, and obviously this doesn't apply in 2020 because you've got teams starting at such different times. But it might start being the case that we should move away from having week 1 rankings because the bias that incurs from that. Take a team like Auburn. Auburn is now unranked, and they were number 7 when they played Georgia. Does Georgia now get credit for a top 10 victory because it beat a team that went on to struggle against Arkansas and then lose to South Carolina, who was 1-2? But so you have to look at the actual value of a team before you can make a determination. There's so many question marks coming in, and people put so much stock into these early season rankings and these off-season rankings, especially the pundits and the decision makers and the college football playoff committee. And I thought it was ridiculous that North Carolina was ranked 5th last week. Turns out I was right.
Yep.
I just think we need a more conscientious approach to how we do the rankings. If they're going to be, I'm fine with having a preseason top 25, but you need to enter with the thought process of, hey, just because a team is ranked number 7 in week 2 doesn't mean they're actually the 7th best team in college football this season. And that needs to be taken into account at the end of the year when the college football playoff is chosen. And we haven't seen that in years past. Teams get credit for high-end wins that weren't actually high-end wins when those teams were exposed later on.
Yeah, that's a great point. I would be for, if you want to have a preseason poll for attention, great. And then let's take a month off. We got a decent sample size then, and we can rank some teams. So that is Andy's. You can't handle the truth. And like I said, he was dead on the money last week about the Tar Heels as they headed to Tallahassee. Mine is regarding this lawsuit by former Iowa players, African-American players, led by Akram Wadley, Cavante Martin-Manley, 2 guys who are high on the career list at running back and wide receiver. They are demanding $10 million from Iowa by today, and I'm not making any comment on the merits of their lawsuit, but I think when you demand the firing of the athletic director, head coach Kirk Ferentz, and assistant coach Brian Ferentz, no university is in a position in the course of a several-day period to bend to the kind of demands that were made regarding those earth-shattering personnel changes. There was a study done by a law firm at Iowa this summer. They acknowledged some issues in the same vicinity of these voiced by these former players. Again, they may have entirely legitimate concerns, but to demand the firing of an AD, a head coach, and an offensive coordinator on the cusp of the season beginning, and putting a October 19th timetable on it with the threat of filing a civil lawsuit if they are not given the demands that they stated, I think is unrealistic and almost feels like extortion to me. I would assume if you enter into a situation like this, your long-term goal is solution to the issues that you found to be lacking in the program. And I just don't think those kinds of solutions can be done on the short, compressed time period that they gave Iowa to react to this. So that would be my you can't handle the truth moment. Before we get on out of here, Andy, any final thoughts on the games this weekend? We'll run through the slate for you one more time. Rutgers is at Michigan State. That's the debut of Mel Tucker. Maryland is at Northwestern. A big second year for Mike Loxley. He needs to build on some of the recruiting success that he's had. They need to try to keep a quarterback healthy. Andy and I both think Penn State at Indiana is going to be a very interesting football game. Illinois is at Wisconsin with Graham Merz making his first start for the Badgers. Michigan is at Minnesota. That one is by far and away, I think, the best game of the weekend. The Iowa road trip to Purdue may involve or may not involve Jeff Brom, the head coach at Purdue. He has a positive test, but we're waiting on a second confirmation test. And if it's confirmed, Andy, am I right? He's out 21 days?
That is correct.
Wow, that'd be a big loss for Purdue as Jeff Brom's their play caller, and that would just be, that's very difficult for any team to overcome that. And then, of course, Nebraska at Ohio State. So those are our games this weekend. Andy, any final thoughts?
Iowa-Purdue is one last interesting game I think we didn't touch on as much, but especially with what's going on outside the program right now with the suit you just mentioned. Will it bring them closer as a team, or will it split them apart? And this weekend's the first real test of that. Purdue is definitely a team that could pull the upset here, especially with the players, the weapons they return on offense, the creative play calling. If Jeff Brom doesn't come up with that second positive, which is expected he will, that doesn't mean their offense is going to be just completely null because Jeff Brom is out of the game. It'll hurt for sure, but I think it's another game where I think there are a lot of interesting storylines, ongoing things that are outside the scope of this season. So that's another game I look forward to watching this weekend, along with the Penn State-Indiana game, the Michigan-Minnesota game, and obviously the Ohio State-Nebraska game. So, I'm looking forward to that one as well.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. Iowa quarterback Spencer Petras will make his first career start in that one. So we're glad we have football to talk about. We will be back on Monday with actual games to discuss. That'll be exciting. We hope you all have a great weekend. Thank you for watching us on the Chris Landry Football channel on Twitch, twitch.tv/Chris Landry Football Show. Share the Twitch show link to any one of your social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, whichever one you wish. Go to the bottom of the screen, right-hand side, click on the share button and send it off. Tell us where you sent it in the chat room. We'll give you a shout-out. Enjoy our friends from the Big 12 with In Defense of the Big 12 at the top of the hour. Have a great week and enjoy football wherever you are.